The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We have good news, which is that this horrifying authoritarian light military parade that Donald Trump has really been angling for since almost before he was inaugurated, right? Didn't he talk about wanting one of these before the inauguration?
Maybe, but what really ramped it up was when he visited Paris.
Yeah.
And the French had their military parade, and he was just loving it.
He was quite taken with it, and it actually looked like the United States Pentagon was moving forward on the military parade, but fortunately they decided late last week that it's not going to happen, at least until 2019. And Donald Trump tried to explain why on Twitter, where he said the local politicians who run Washington, D.C. poorly know a windfall when they see it. When asked to give us a price for holding a great celebratory military parade, they wanted a number so ridiculously high that I canceled it, which doesn't really appear to be true. It appears as though the Pentagon came to Trump and said, this is a disastrous idea. I don't think we should do it. We don't think we should do it. And then Trump, I guess, sort of acquiesced to that. But this is expensive no matter what. Like, Trump is trying to make it seem like it would be cheap to do a military parade, except for the fact that liberals who run D.C. gave us an outrageous price tag. These parades are insanely expensive. You need to, number one, first of all, just the staffing for additional law enforcement, right? Like the overtime expenses for law enforcement are insane for one event. Then you need to get all of the military equipment, including, I don't know what he had in mind, but the tanks and the bombs and the platoons of soldiers and all this stuff. You got to get everybody to Washington, D.C. and to the parade route. And then a lot of people don't know about this part, but when you run tanks over regular roads, it destroys the roads. And the cost to repair those roads, which supposedly Republicans, they don't want all these public works projects and infrastructure spending, to just repair the damage done from running the tanks all over the roads. It's insanely expensive.
Yeah, the price tag was up to $100 million. And of course that piece matters, but maybe what's more significant is the image that we're putting out there in the world. Like, we already have the biggest military many, many times over.
Yeah.
We don't have to do this sort of thing. This is the kind of thing that Russia does and North Korea does because they're trying to showboat, to show off what they have. But I think that silent confidence is a little bit better, right?
Well, if you believe in the concept of speak softly and carry a big stick, the military parade is speaking loudly, right? Speaking softly and carrying the big stick is the fact that everybody knows the United States has a gigantic military, and we, as well as some other countries, have enough nukes to destroy the entire planet many, many times over. You don't need the military parade, and this just goes to Donald Trump being very impressed by authoritarian types. Now, I know that apparently part of what impressed him was going to France and seeing that military parade, but there's just a different tradition with the French military parade. I'm not saying I like it any better. Like, I still think that it's not a practice that I like, but usually Emmanuel Macron is sort of framed as the feminized, liberal whatever, even though it's not even really accurate when you talk about Macron, but it doesn't matter. The idea that now Trump is being so pushed around in terms of his emotions by what he sees from France is silly, but it's a totally different tone in France. What Trump wants is the more North Korean, Iranian, Russian type parade.
You know how Trump always has that attitude too of like, I'm going to take my ball and go home?
Yeah.
Apparently, in response to this news that the parade's getting canceled, he said that he's going to go to France for the next Veterans Day, Armistice Day, instead, and see their parade again, because it was just so wonderful the last time.
I think it's a great thing for him to leave the country. That is something that we can all hopefully get behind. There have been some interesting controversies involving religious displays on public property, and the Satanic Temple's involvement in that has been very often to point out the hypocrisy of symbols of Christianity, whether it's a manger scene or the Ten Commandments or many other iterations being displayed there, but a sort of rejection or skepticism of the religious symbols of other religions being displayed. And the Satanic Temple has actually had a number of different successes when there is a Christian display put on state property in a state building or wherever the case may be, using the legal system to get some of their, I guess we would call them symbols or displays or messages, idols. Yeah, maybe, I don't know if idols is the right word. And what they are now doing is moving a bronze statue of a goat-headed and winged creature to the state capitol in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's called, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, I believe it's Baphomet or Baphomet. I don't know the exact emphasis on that word. And Lucian Graves, who's the co-founder of the Satanic Temple and a former guest of the David Pakman Show, told a crowd that gathered at what they're calling a First Amendment rally, I present to you Baphomet, which is this, again, 7.5-foot winged goat-like figure which symbolizes pluralism, legal equality, tolerance, and reconciliation. And I think this is great. Yeah. I think that we should not have religious symbols on state property. When I was in, some of you remember, it was in, man, I think it's December. It's almost 9 months now. 9 months ago, I went to rural northern Indiana. And when I was there, at a couple of different city halls, there were First Amendment displays. And I'm sorry,
First Amendment, yeah.
10 Commandments displays, not First Amendment displays, 10 Commandments displays. And it wasn't even controversial in these places because just basically everybody's Christian and nobody really cares about having other stuff there and they just love it. But I think that that is just objectively wrong. It's an establishment of religion by the government. The fact that Christianity has a cultural place in American history makes no difference to me. And I support every time the Satanic Temple does this. I think it is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and it puts it all in perspective. And it's funny to watch the Little Rock, Arkansas public officials comment on this.
Yeah.
Like they're talking about how this Satanic Temple is so incredibly offensive to the good Christians in Arkansas. And you want to point out, like, that's the point. That's why they're trolling you. That's why they're doing this, to put it all in perspective and to show that we shouldn't have these satanic idols here. We also shouldn't have the 10 Commandments or any of this stuff.
Yeah, when you say that a satanic figure is offensive to Christians or to non-Satanists, how can you say that and not recognize that anybody who is either of a different religious faith than Christianity or simply not religious at all could find a 10 Commandments display or a manger scene to be equally offensive or off-putting? And, you know, good luck in states like Arkansas convincing them of this.
I wish they could just understand the spirit of what the First Amendment's all about and what separation of church and state is all about.
Yeah.
Like, why does it have to resort to someone protesting for them to make the right decision and to take the 10 Commandments down? Like, they should just know that from the get-go.
And of course, this can't, the logical conclusion of this is that every religious display that is requested must be allowed. And of course, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different religions, and it's completely impractical to display all of those. Well, so at a certain point, you would think that the principle would come to the surface, which is, what if we just don't pick and choose any religious stuff to have here?
What about like during the holiday season, right? So like maybe Christians can have their manger and Jews can have, why am I blanking on this?
A menorah?
The menorah, yeah. And then the Satanists can come in too and do their thing. I mean,
that's
once
fine.
the Satanists come in, everyone's going to be pissed off. But as long as everyone gets their thing, is that fine?
Well, it's fine, but it's impossible because, once again, most people aren't even aware of all of the different religions that have some sacred day, some day that they celebrate. And you literally, you would have to be 365 days a year just dealing with religious displays.
Well, I think it's fine, though, because if you have a small town of, say, 3,000 people, and everyone infiltrates and, you know, puts their idols there and wants to celebrate the religious holiday in their own way, I mean, as long as you allow everyone in, I think that's totally fine.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe at some point it becomes untenable, but for most communities, it's not going to get to that point.
I think very quickly it would become untenable. I disagree. I think that very quickly it would become untenable. And I agree, if that's the policy, that would at least be a fair policy towards all religions. But no place is actually interested in doing that. They're interested in establishing certain religions. If you didn't know it, the United States still has troops in Iraq, and they are going to stay in Iraq, quote, as long as needed, now to help stabilize regions that were previously controlled by ISIS. And this is according to a spokesman for the U.S.-led international coalition that's fighting ISIS militants there. Quote, we'll keep troops there as long as we think they're needed. The main reason, after ISIS is defeated militarily, is the stabilization efforts, and we will need to be there for that. So that's one of the reasons we'll maintain a presence. That's Colonel Sean Ryan, who spoke at a news conference in Abu Dhabi recently. We now have about 5,200 U.S. troops based in Iraq. Now, these numbers are interesting because you might remember back during the Obama administration, I would regularly tell you 1,000 troops have been dispatched to Iraq. An additional 1,000 troops. The total number is now 2,500. We were covering this all along. And this has become one of those pseudo-political footballs in the sense that, on the one hand, Donald Trump claims that our involvement in Iraq was one of the gravest foreign policy mistakes that has been made in recent years, that George W. Bush, that it's one of the biggest mistakes George W. Bush made during his administration. And at the same time, there's really no discussion of the fact that we now have more than 5,000 troops in Iraq because of ISIS. And of course, we generally speaking accept at this point that ISIS formed in Iraq or took control in Iraq in certain regions as a result of the vacuum that was created by George W. Bush's initial harebrained and haphazard involvement back in 2003. So at a certain point, you have to say, this is the end of the line, right? So when it was Barack Obama, we had conversations which said, okay, we're sending some troops because we are, in a sense, responsible for ISIS now being there because of that power vacuum that we created via George W. Bush's invasion. But how far does that responsibility go? We didn't know the answer. We could make the same argument now. Well, now we're beyond Obama and it's Donald Trump and we've got 5,200 troops there. And if the sort of root cause, the root catalyst here was George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, how far does our responsibility go? And this is the exact type of situation that doesn't make headlines very often because officially the war is over and we've left Iraq. But 5,000 troops is still a significant number. And there is effectively no serious discussion going at the national level about this. There are programs that cover this. We make an effort to talk about it. But if you're so against our involvement in Iraq, at a certain point, don't you have to say, this is as far as our responsibility goes, and we're getting out now?
Well, some Republicans will tell you with a straight face that we should just stay in Iraq for 100 years, similar to what we've done with Germany and with Japan.
Permanent presence.
And if that's the case, we should just never be getting involved in these countries in the first place. I mean, there's that common Republican talking point now because pretty much everyone understands that the war in Iraq was a mistake. They'll say,
do they?
we never should have went in, but Obama should never have taken us out so early. And I think that kind of muddies the waters, don't you? I mean, What would be your response to that talking point? Trump has said that countless
My
times.
response would be Bush put up a mission accomplished banner like a week in, and that arguably was the real mistake. And even though we know that the war in practice lasted much, much longer than that, at the very beginning, we should have been more upfront about how long it was going to take. We were told it's going to take a week or two. Rumsfeld, I think, said it, and we're going to be greeted as liberators and all that stuff. It didn't happen. Mission accomplished to begin with was a political ploy, even though nothing actually ended. In fact, 99% of the U.S. troop deaths and civilian deaths happened after the mission accomplished fiasco. We should just have gotten a straight-up, honest perspective from the beginning. We didn't get that, and now you end up with those types of talking points. Like, the problem wasn't Bush going in. It was Obama getting us out too early. And, if people are determined to use that type of post-facto argument, you're not really going to be able to have a conversation with them.
They make it sound as if both Bush and Obama were equally responsible, which is pretty ridiculous. Like, if your guy goes and messes up the entire situation there, and then you're upset with how our guy tries to clean it up, that's still on you. I mean, you shouldn't have messed it up in the first place.
Were it not for the second guy, in this case Obama, or let me put it a different way, the second guy, in this case Obama, had no responsibility for us being there in the first place. And therefore, saying that he is equally to blame for what one might argue was a failed cleanup effort is absolutely wrong. You can say that he may have made mistakes in how quickly he pulled troops out. I'm not saying that he did. I'm saying you could argue that. But to say that he shares equal responsibility is wrong. Along those same lines, it would be crazy to say that by keeping 5,200 troops in, Trump is as guilty as he says George W. Bush is. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. What I am saying is, at what point do we say, this is it and we're getting out? And it's also not just politics, because I don't deny that if you pull out 5,200 troops, there will be a real impact. And that impact could be negative for the stability of Iraq or the region. I don't deny that for a second. What I'm asking is, where does our responsibility end? If someone wants to write to me and tell me where you think our responsibility ends, I'd love to hear from you. That's it for today's bonus show. We will talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.